because, as I said, strictly speaking, the way that we're going to talk about working with emotions, this isn't, primarily sort of a therapeutic technique. It can be a sort of therapeutic technique, but it's not the same as therapy. There's not somebody else there, with you all the time. You're not talking it all through with somebody else. Sometimes that can be very, very helpful for some people. And an important part of their process of not only personal growth, but also even their process of awakening, in the sense that if our own turmoil is constantly pulling us back into it, sometimes we need something and someone who can help us to begin to bring some coherence to that turmoil. The way I'm approaching this whole emotional work is much of it, it's not completely dependent, but to a certain extent it's dependent upon some ability to have some inner resource of your own stability. And the reason that's so important as we move ahead is because if there isn't any inner resource of stability, then when you go into the emotional world, it just sweeps you away. It sweeps you away into, the emotion. It sweeps you away into the story. It sweeps you away into the associations. It sweeps you away into the memory and all of that. So this is how I'm using this ground of being, this ground of awareness, as a refuge inside of yourself, or a point of reference of stability. Right? So this becomes important that you have some experiential point of reference. Like I said, it could be the clear space of awareness. It could be a sense of peace. It could be a sense of calm. It could be a sense of well-being. It could be a sense of love or compassion or empathy. All these are resources, they're experiences that start within yourself. And if you pay attention to them, if you sort of hang out with any of these sort of essential qualities of being, they have a way of restoring a sense of balance and calm within your own system, within your own being, right? So as we move into the dealing with the emotions, and as I said at the very beginning of this program, I think this is one of the reasons we're spending a couple months on this component, this emotional component, is because, especially in the world of spirituality, it can be easy. Well, number one, I think a lot of people start in spirituality with the idea that if they just have the correct spiritual experience, all their emotional difficulties will somehow just disappear in a puff of smoke, in a puff of grand realization. And while it's true that a certain amount of your emotional challenges can disappear with a great revelation, it's very rarely, if ever, the case that they all just suddenly disappear all at once, never to come back. Even though that's what I think a certain number of people hope. And it's also what certain teachings promise. They don't actually end up delivering on the promise, really, for very many people, but some teachings do actually kind of either overtly or covertly kind of give that as sort of a promise. But you and I and everybody else, none of us live in a world of abstractions. We don't live in a world of teaching, spiritual or psychological or otherwise. We live in the world of the actuality of our own individual lived experience. That will always have more concrete reality to it than all the ways that we are taught to interpret that experience. Right? And so in spirituality, the hope that you're just going to sort of have a transcendent experience and go past all of your difficulties is, well, it just usually doesn't work out quite that way. It's not quite that simple. As many of you already know, you can have tremendously transformative experiences, And it doesn't mean that you've got your entire emotional act together just because you've had some of those experiences. It gives you a different vantage point from which to deal with them, from which to encounter your own emotional experience of your own humanity. But it doesn't really immediately just get rid of all the contradictions and all the confusions. In fact, what a great spiritual awakening will do is it'll sort of open you to the transcendent light, but it will also open you to the deeper realms of your unconscious that you've hid from. So sometimes your deepest shadow stuff comes up after you've had a spiritual awakening, which can be quite surprising and unexpected for a lot of people. And to have a kind of basic operational emotional maturity, not only is it necessary to continue to evolve and mature spiritually, but it also is necessary to be able to embody and to live the deepest things you know. In other words, to begin to embody and live from your own deepest wisdom and your own deepest sense of love, whatever that might be at any particular point in time. Right? And so developing a sense of emotional maturity is really important. Often developing a real deep sense of emotional maturity is also extraordinarily challenging. It's extraordinarily challenging because often we have to, number one, admit to what's unresolved and still turning in us that we might not want to deal with. We might not even want to admit it's there. A lot of people actually use spiritual teachings as a means to not admit to their emotional lives. They just try to sort of transcend it or bypass it or pretend that it's actually not there. And, you can try that for a while, but in the end it doesn't work very well. And so we can be using spirituality to kind of try not to admit to ourselves what's actually, occurring, and hoping, that we might not have to deal with any of it if we have enough spiritual insight. Both of those conclusions, both of those hopes don't end up to be true. Right? And so, however emotional, the way that I'm approaching this from is I think there are some very fundamental understandings, insights that emotional insights that are very conducive to emotional maturity that we can miss along the way. And when I say insights, I don't simply mean that we have an intellectual understanding. That can help. It can actually help quite a bit. But to really understand something is to kind of live it, to really kind of discover it from the inside out rather than to impose it from the outside in. Right. And so I want to start with a few of those insights. This is like getting the correct orientation of the emotional terrain for any human being. These are pretty universal, and they are understandings about emotional makeup that if you don't get them, if you don't understand them, that they're going to lead to pain and suffering and sorrow. And if you do really get it on a deep level, then they'll really start to be doorways to, number one, healing a lot of emotional wounding, but also being able to step into a greater step of emotional maturity, which means a greater step of just human maturity, and begin to really embody and live the deeper parts of your knowing and the deeper parts of your experience.